Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, where we prefer truth over narrative and principles over politics. And I have another return guest today where we couldn't get into everything in that first episode, but we probably won't get into everything in this episode
So,
either. But it's going to be good. But before we get into everything, you know what to do. You need to like this. You need to hit that like button like it did something to you personally. You need to share this, and then you also need to subscribe if you haven't already. See, I can't talk right because you haven't subscribed yet. So hit that subscribe button and that notification bell. That way you'll be updated whenever I upload a new episode. Also, check out my Substack. It's called Chasing Liberty. You can access that at libertychasers.com. It's been proven by scientists to drastically improve your weight loss. You don't need Ozempic. Just go to Chasing Liberty and subscribe, and you will automatically lose weight. I guarantee it. All right, now that I got that out the way, I want to bring him back on. My guest today is the illustrious Mike Decentralize, who I've had on before, but we're going to dig some more deeper into what we were talking about. Welcome to the program, brother.
good to be here, Jeff. Good to see you.
Awesome, awesome. So before we were talking about the concept of township liberation, we've been talking about nullification. You're very big on local politics. So we're going to be talking about more about that. We're going to be getting a little bit deeper. But before that, just to remind the audience, who are you? What are you about? All that good stuff.
All right, so I'm this sort of crazy Southern California Jesus freak agorist who has decided that honestly we have to reconstitute our liberty from the bottom up because it's pretty clear we're facing a global dystopia from the top down. And so I've kind of been inspired by one of my favorite skeptics, Thomas Paine, who wrote Common Sense nearly 250 years ago, and I've decided this is our model, right? This is something we need to kind of, when people talk about getting back to certain things, I think we need kind of that a bit of a reboot, starting from that perspective, the one that inspired even predates and inspired the Declaration of Independence, which of course gave us the very concept of consent, government only by consent of the governed. So yeah, that's become my mission. I've set aside just about everything else to try to reignite this concept of using small local governing bodies to nullify the unjust and dystopian governance of larger governing bodies. And it's not just confined to the United States. It's a concept that could conceivably work in any common law country, really anywhere in Western civilization where it can take hold, or anywhere in the so-called free world. So that's become my mission now. So there you go.
Great, great. So before we dive in, just for people who don't know, or maybe people who haven't seen the first part, can you just really quickly explain the concept of township liberation and nullification and why that's important to get to where we want to get to?
Well, basically, this is a strategy that I employed myself back when I was in my 20s and very active in the local Libertarian Party here in Orange County, California. In the 90s, I was pretty much doing what what is now described by, say, for example, by the Mises Caucus of the Libertarian Party. Say what you want about them, but this is a great idea. The idea of emphasizing local government and local races in what they call a project, I think Operation Decentralize Revolution.
Mhm.
This is something that I was doing back in the 90s, and it so resonates with me. And the idea of township liberation is, again, it's trying to find the place that you can, wherever it can be done. Maybe it's not in your immediate area, maybe you have to go a couple townships over, but wherever you can get traction to essentially use a local governing body, as I mentioned, to nullify, to reject, and to essentially practice civil disobedience against larger governing bodies. And that's the concept of nullification. Nullification has a rich history in common law, and and one of my favorite examples, of course, is in the mid 1800s was the nullification of the fugitive slave law, which essentially said we're not going to enforce this unjust, ungodly law. Well, nowadays, maybe not something quite so obviously heinous, but there are plenty of ungodly, unjust laws coming down from above, from this top-down dystopian model that is really the exact opposite of what the founding fathers, so to speak, would have entertained or would have wanted to see, and it's also the exact opposite of the the movements that helped increase individual liberty in this country. It would be the exact opposite of anything any abolitionist would have supported, and it's the exact opposite of anything any suffragist would have wanted. Where this dictating force, centralized power, is controlling everybody down, to the individual level. That's not the order that we're supposed to have, right? We're supposed to have the inverse of that, where the individual is the guiding force of a free society, and that was the purpose that I'm trying to again revive. Right, that idea. It's common sense, as Thomas Paine would say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is common sense, but it doesn't really seem to be the common sense of today. I mean, today's common
No,
sense is
it's
more,
not.
hey, we got it, the federal government rules over everybody. It's why we focus on the federal level way more than we do the
Yes.
state and local level. So the prevailing wisdom today is that the president matters the most, Congress, the Supreme Court, maybe to a little bit of a lesser degree, state governments, but really not local. So before I actually get into the nuts and bolts of it, I mean, I've been trying to use my platform to educate people
Yes.
on the importance of focusing on your mayors, your city councils, sheriffs, dog catcher, I don't care.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
people are starting to get it, but obviously we know we're the minority. The people who understand this are political minorities. And you probably saw the video I put out, my appeal to
Yeah.
disenchanted conservatives. I went over that
That's
too.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really well done. If you don't mind me saying so, that was well done. Very succinct, to the point. Perfect.
Yeah, and you brought up the issue, the idea of having coalitions with these folks, which I want to get to later. But what do you think are some of the best ways to really get people to change their mindsets on this? Because it really is kind of a deprogramming and reprogramming effort
Yeah.
because of just the brainwashing we've all had.
Yeah, no, there's I'll tell you what, I got approached by this. It's kind of funny. This is coming just on the heels of a workshop that I do. I've dedicated to start doing. I'm going to do more of them through my Township Liberation X page. I did an X Spaces where this exact thing came up, where people have attempted to make coalitions. I do this on Tuesdays now at noon Pacific time, which is 8 p.m. UK time. And I have a lot of, I'm doing it primarily for my UK friends.
Mhm.
And a lot of them said, hey, look, we tried to do this sort of like local coalition building. And, there's some people that show up and they're wacky. They're either expressing ideas that we need to have some sort of violence, or that maybe they're either legitimately crazy or maybe they're MI5. I don't know, but they're skeptic. There's a danger to opening up this kind of coalition, right? Because sometimes you get these outliers, you don't know where they're coming from, and so they raised a very good point yesterday, and I want to kind of dive a little bit into that. And it's perfectly fine to set up boundaries to your gatherings, right? Where you like if you're talking violence, this is about nullification. This is about peaceful non-compliance. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about, taking up arms or using zombie knives or whatever they have over there in the UK nowadays. But it's not about violence, and so that you can put a hard stop to that sort of thing. And ideally, as I suggested in the spaces, this is again the worst case scenario type of situation. I mean, I have a fairly good relationship with my local sheriff department. Obviously, I'm skeptical of a number of aspects of law enforcement, but at least sheriffs are accountable to a vote, at least, right? So I'm not opposed to the concept of sheriffs. City PDs is a different story. Thankfully, I don't live under a city police department anymore personally, but the idea is, have have them on speed dial in case somebody shows up to your gathering where you're attempting to build a coalition and disrupts it in some way, shape, or form. So I almost feel like I want to get that issue out of the way because it can and does happen. It happened to me in the 90s. And, I at the time I was living in Huntington Beach, and there's city cops, and I still reached out to them. I was like, hey, my tax dollars are telling me that I should be reaching out to you to get rid of this person who's showing up and talking nonsense. At a meeting that's meant to be a peaceful gathering and a discussion of peaceful activism. So have that in your back pocket is the first thing I would say. And then secondly, the idea is, it won't come quickly, and so it's going to require a lot of patience. But a lot of people who have been programmed to focus on the national level politics have been programmed to think of, and I hate to say this, but it's true, these political figures running for president as some kind of messianic figure. That deprogramming doesn't come away. It doesn't happen quickly. All right, generally for most people. For some people it does. Some people it's like a light switches on and they're like, wow, all of a sudden I went from diehard MAGA Republican to straight up agorist, or something like. I have seen that, but that's the exception rather than the rule. And it's also not entirely necessary, right? I think the idea is to get people on the path, so to speak, right? It's like, look, I don't push the issue. Like you need to abandon your quasi worship of these political figures at the national level. You need to abandon national politics. I'm not coming at it from that perspective. I'm saying, hey, look, what you will need to consider is, even if your best case scenario happens, let's be honest, what has happened, even if you're, regardless of your political point of view, it's really starting to come out now from all sides, this idea that there really isn't there's something else going on in the executive branch besides, right? Besides just the person we elect, right? I mean, if the last, year has taught us anything, is that the president isn't really running things, right? I mean that's a case in point. The Biden administration, right? Like he's not even there, right? He's literally not even there here, and he's not there physically, and he's just so who's running things? Obviously, I think a veil has been torn, and what people are starting to recognize, albeit maybe very slowly, is that kind of what I've said, and I've tweeted this: the pirates have taken over the bridge. And have done so probably a long time ago.
Yeah.
All right. So rather than try to, debate over the best way to retake the bridge, knowing darn well that whoever we elect captain is still not in charge, maybe we scuttle the ship and start a little bit different like approach, right? But again, I'm not expecting people to get this right away. I'm not expecting people to abandon or deprogram themselves from, the emphasis on national politics right away. I'm just posing the questions to people. Okay, so what happens if your guy or gal or whoever gets the top spot? What happens then? And the reality is, not enough ever changes for the better anyway, regardless. The idea is, we have to start shaping things the way we instinctively know the way they should be, I think, as Americans, with fundamental American principles in the world immediately around us, regardless of like for example, the hypothetical MAGA Trump supporter. What happens if Trump gets in? Okay, so let's say he gets his second term. He pulls a Grover Cleveland and gets a second non-consecutive term. What's the best that can happen from that? Maybe a reprieve for a little while for us to organize. But we saw what happened. Let's assume he's a good guy. We saw what happened in his first term. He either went along with with the dystopia, or kind of played little games with these dystopian forces behind the scenes, or they straight up, and when he wouldn't, they straight up went after him. Like it was combat, and it's combat even he's out of office for 4 years. It's still,
Well, even look at what
combat.
happened
So
under
what
COVID. That was under Trump. The whole COVID
it
thing.
was
You
so
stop it.
he went along with it, right? Yeah, he went along with it. So obviously, I mean, like it or not, he can be tricked. Even if you think he has the best intentions, he can clearly be tricked. He can be deceived, and he can be misled. And that's what was going on at best case scenario in his
Yeah.
first term. The second term, maybe he's a little bit more aware, right? But still, I hate to say he's not terribly principled or centered, obviously. So what's the best? If that's your best case scenario, we get a reprieve, right? We maybe get, okay, they're going to focus on him and he'll take the shots, if nothing else. What do we do after that? Like what happens after that? A JD Vance presidency? That's not, no. Let's talk about what we can do instead of just delegating to this political figure at the national level. We have to start taking ownership. And I know it's difficult. I know there's a lot of things that get in the way of even being able to focus on this. Not everybody has the luxury that I sort of have right now, which is I can focus largely full time on this sort of thing. But even just part time, let's get organized at the local level, because at best we're going to get a Donald Trump presidency, again, from the MAGA perspective, buys us some time. But he exposed something. I think we can all agree that there's something behind the scenes, and just the absence of any visible leadership out of the executive branch of the government right now as we speak kind of reveals the fact that we're not being run by who we think we're being run by, that national elections are kind of a facade. That's the lesson that we can patiently impart to people who otherwise are convinced that if our guy gets in, then everything's going to be okay. So it's not going to be a quick process with most of these folks. Some it might be, but the idea is to slowly, if necessary, slowly and patiently shift their attention to the long game, which does not involve national level politics, like at all. It really is a revelation that is going to be hard for people to swallow. So I'm being as extra patient. I'm asking the Lord for extra measures of patience, because it's not easy to convey this thought to people, because it really is disconnecting. It's kind of become a cliche, but it is like disconnecting from the matrix.
Yeah.
It's because we're meant to. So these are hard to swallow pills we're going to be giving people, but so I can do small doses over time. I can do micro dosing truth, over time, because that's just the world we live in. That's what it takes to do the deprogramming you're talking about, and the shift of emphasis. And I don't want to even necessarily condescend to people, because I think most folks are well-meaning, like that they want to see things improved in our society, and in the free world, but they, as you alluded to, have been conditioned to accept, that they delegate that to other forces, bigger people than themselves.
Yeah.
And in reality, that's right.
Yeah, this is actually one of those areas where I'm okay with using the word brainwashing, because I don't usually use that word because it is condescending. It's always used in a condescending manner. But the thing is,
It kind of is.
it happened to all of us, right? This isn't just
It
one
did.
group of people. Unless you had like more libertarian agorist parents, which means you're like less than a 0.5% of the
Yeah.
population, you've been
Right.
brainwashed too. We all have been.
That's right.
I mean, this
It's
is
truly.
yeah, it is one of the biggest psyops that we've ever seen. This
That's right.
psyops that has been going on for hundreds of years. So yeah,
That's true.
it is. And over this time,
Yes.
we have been conditioned to focus more on the federal level and on the president as a savior. The president wasn't always that important of a position, and a lot of people don't know that.
No.
But
That's right.
now it's almost like a king, and we think if we get our guy elected, everything will be fine.
It's
We can stop paying attention, and we don't stop to think, well, wait a minute, my guy won, but has my life really changed that much for the better? Chances
right.
are the
Right.
answer is no to that question, but we don't think about that. A lot of that is because of the conditioning.
It is, and I don't know if we mentioned this in the last time, but I really feel like the bread and circuses, the idea of creating something that's a distraction, to deliberately deflect the attention of the masses on how miserable and manipulated their lives really are. That used to be professional sports, and don't get me wrong, I love it too, but I think it's shifted. I think politics itself has become the
Yes.
bread and circuses, at least on social media, particularly on X, right? Which is pretty much where only social media platform I spend any quality time on. X is particularly focusing our attention on national level politics and reinforcing what I consider to be ultimately a pretty big distraction from where the real power is supposed to be. I mean, again, it's like people have forgotten they're supposed to have the power, or maybe as you were alluding to, we were never told that. I mean, it's right there in the Declaration of Independence, right? Government by consent of the governed,
Yeah.
and yet, yeah, you're right. But that's somehow been muddied, that's been distorted, or even ignored in our upbringings, our collective upbringings, and that's a brainwashing thing, right? That's like, wait a minute, we've drifted so far from consent of the governed, it's not even like it's unrecognizable. And granted, we've talked about this last time. There are some in very pronounced inherent flaws in the way this republic was formed, right? I mean, the hints were how Shays Rebellion and the Whiskey Rebellion were handled, even in the very first administration of George Washington. There are some hints that there's something wasn't quite consistent from the get-go, and then that's not even counting like the tolerance of the abomination of chattel slavery, which was an anathema to individual rights. So there were some inherent flaws, right? But that notion of consent of the governed somehow survived, long enough to make the United States different, just different enough to be a positive influence, to export that idea to what we may want to call at one point the Free West. But that's been buried though. Even that, so it's now just like, well, we're better because we allow for slightly more freedom than China, yeah, what I mean, or some other, name a country that we're just, we're freer than North Korea, which, think about it, is not really a high bar, but
Right.
that's the mentality now. Like we're protecting you from these, these threats, real and orchestrated. I do think that's the other thing that we have to realize is that they will orchestrate genuine threats now. So therein lies another sort of a thing we have to contend with and realize is that COVID-19 may have been largely hype, but this potential for World War III is not. That is something that I think is, yeah, the enemy thing. That sometimes creating enemies are sure they're orchestrated, but they're still legitimate enemies, right? I mean, there are still guys that flew planes into buildings, right,
Exactly.
on September 11th. There are still guys on hang gliders that attacked Israel, right? These are still, I mean, yeah, sure, there may have been some orchestration behind the scenes, or maybe some turning, a blind eye, towards a potential threat. But the threats were still as orchestrated as they may have been, and I'm
Yeah,
not
they're
going to say
still
one way or
real.
the other, but yeah, they're still real enemies. They're still real threats, even though they may have been manufactured to one extent or another.
Mhm.
So that's something we have to also consider. Like this has to be something that I like the fact that it's from the bottom up. I like the fact that it's decentralized and it's from the bottom up because it's more difficult to. And I also like the fact that it can happen in multiple places across not just the country but the world simultaneously. Because I think that it has to be that way because otherwise a threat can be created, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise you can get Wacoed, or what I mean, or you know what I mean, like there's they can converge on a single location, right? Or but multiple locations in a highly decentralized fashion. Now we're talking, that's a little more difficult to crush, so to speak, with some kind of oppressive government action. So that's in the back of my head too, because even though I'm talking about nullification, a peaceful noncompliance, that may not necessarily be interpreted that way, by centralized power that I'm seeking to pretty much openly seeking to undermine. So this is where faith comes in. It's like, Lord, just guide our footsteps because we could be in for a wild ride, but it's one we need to have.
Yeah, I mean, and as this movement grows, I mean, we can damn well expect for the feds and others to start. They already have, I think. They've already started putting their feelers in
Yeah,
there. They're already trying to monitor this stuff because it is a threat to their control. It blatantly is. Especially if it's not
yes,
necessarily violent, because that gives them less of an excuse to use violent force.
right,
Doesn't mean they still wouldn't.
right,
It'll be harder for them to do it. But kind of, I want to
yeah,
transition over to like the kind of the nuts and bolts of this. So for people who might be watching
sure.
this, maybe they're already amenable to the idea of nullification, decentralization. How would you suggest that people engage with their local politics in a way that leads to real and tangible change, especially if they haven't really been all that politically active before? What can the average person do? What actions can they start taking to start making a difference?
Yeah, there's a couple things that I would recommend right off the bat, and that is obviously attend to stuff, right? Attend your local council meeting, attend events where you interact with so-called officials, whatever format that would be. I mean, even if it's just like for example, I went to the here in Orange County, California. The city of Orange has an international street fair, and there was there's a booth, ask the mayor, and the mayor was there. The mayor of the city of Orange in Orange County, California, was there at this festival to answer questions and interact with people. So you could approach that person and ask them questions and whatnot. So get engaged on a personal level in whatever manner is afforded you, right? A little bit of that, but also seek out people of potentially like mind. I've worked with some straight up MAGA types to kind of help guide the nullification of Sacramento from Huntington Beach, California, and the city council there is a 7-person city council. The city council majority, I mean, they're basically varying degrees of liberty friendly, but they're all MAGA types, right? They won in 2020 in a landslide, specifically to counteract the effects of Governor Gavin Newsom's dystopian ordinances that he was trying to pass down to the counties and the cities and so forth in California. And within the first year of them taking the majority, that city council majority, again with a 4-3 vote, passed an ordinance which outlawed mask mandates, vaccine mandates, and basically undid all of the potential. And they're also requiring voter ID. And even though this is a great news story, by the way, even though the Sacramento legislature said, well, they passed a law which says, cities in California can't require voter identification, like literally passed a law that said you cannot require voter ID. Huntington Beach is going to require voter ID. Like it's basically, it's like, okay, this is now an active civil disobedience, citywide active civil disobedience. Now, I may not agree with some of these guys on their national level politics positions, or even at the state level. Like I wouldn't necessarily even support some of some of them I would be even skeptical about supporting if they wanted to get higher than the city council. But oh my God, do I support those actions, right? Like that's I 100% applaud that. I will get behind that. So this is again following kind of a model that I employed in the 90s. When it was a little more evenly split between left wingers and right wingers. Like, as a libertarian, I could align myself with the anti-war movement, because back in the 90s, Democrats were anti-war. I don't know if you knew about that, but that was right. They were anti-war. They questioned authority, and they were anti-surveillance state. And it was great. I could work with Democrats on those things. Those days seem to be gone, and I don't know what happened exactly, but I watched it unfold the last 25 years, and it's uncanny, right? And I thought we were still okay until George W. Bush finally left office, and then all of a sudden, well, war is okay now. We really wanted this anyway. That back in the 90s, though, I could work with them on anti-war stuff. Back in the 90s, I could work with conservative groups and Republican groups on opposing gun control measures, which is of course all the rage in California.
Yes.
And anti-tax stuff, that was a big one, right? That was I mean, we were right there alongside local GOP. Fighting for the end of gun control restrictions, and fighting for the removal of unjust taxation, anything anti-tax. I mean, we were right there with them. So it was easier to build coalitions on both sides back in those days. Nowadays, I have to admit, the MAGA populist Trump right is actually almost as anti-war, if not as much, selectively though. But that's another topic. But the point being is right. You know what I mean. You know which country I'm talking about. But the point being is that they are they're at least significantly more anti-war than the political left today, than the Democrats today. Which is, I never thought I'd see that happen. Honestly, like growing up. You're right. I never did. Like, I mean, in the 80s, it was like, the Republicans were the war party, right? This is what I was, and my parents, who were Republicans, or objectivist Republicans, which is really interesting, were all about, yes, we need to, American exceptionalism. We need to be there, or somebody else will be there, right? So they're really very into the interventionist lie. And that was my first step away from how I grew up. Nowadays, though, it seems like that's actually that sort of anti-war sentiment is found among the MAGA right, which is why, again, I'm a little more working with that version of the conservative right. I find myself almost exclusively, in the case of Huntington Beach, working with those kinds of people. And I would like to think that since we're the principal ones, right? Since liberty is a consistent philosophy, and yeah, I'm a little bit more extreme. I'm an agorist, so I guess engaging in politics is a step for me right now.
Right.
But I think it's working, right? I think it's working. I think we can have that impact on this group of people, particularly as their their sort of chosen figurehead invariably becomes less able to shape anything, in terms of national level politics, or in terms of politics in general. So, in other words, eventually that sort of, I hate to call it a spell, but but that spell will wear off. Of, we have to have this guy fighting for us, and it will start to take, ideally, this form of like, okay, we need to do this for ourselves. I'm again sort of pleased to find, and I would recommend people start with your local MAGA groups. Just find out who's doing MAGA stuff, and it's okay to be like the slightly different, in some cases significantly different, member of that group, right? Especially if you can introduce principles like creating a parallel society. You'd be surprised how easy it's been for me to sort of relay Samuel Gompkin the third ideas to MAGA people. Like, we need to have a parallel society. We need to have a whole parallel everything. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. I'm not getting into like the five markets and the red market and the black market. I'm not going into deep into Konkin, but it's the concept is, they're aware now. Like, this is we really do have two Americas already. We have a
Yes.
America that is completely subservient to centralized power, and unquestioningly so. And we have everybody else, and that everybody else is pretty broad. That's another reason why I'm not like, some people are like, oh, RFK Jr. sold out and this and that. I'm like, yes and no. I mean, first of all, yeah, I also reached out to local Kennedy groups, okay, because honestly, that's a significant chunk of people. I'm not so concerned about the integrity, and this may sound weird, but I'm not so concerned about the integrity of the figurehead. I'm
Right.
more concerned about the integrity of the people who actually decided to show up every morning at the local freeway overpasses over the 5 freeway here in southern Orange County with their RFK signs and whatnot. Well, where are their heads at now, right? I want, it's like this is opportunity, I think, to capture a lot of people, as I described when I co-wrote that revival of common sense. Like, this is a broad spectrum that we can influence now, of the actual people doing the work already at the grassroots level. So that's my sort of part three to that, to your question, is find the RFK Jr. people, find out what they're doing, and find out where their heads are at. I mean, are they really consolidating with the MAGA people? Well, I mean, this again provides an opportunity for, I think, for liberty-minded people to be the bridge, the principled bridge between these two camps, right? And to get, again, the practical grassroots people on the page of individual liberty. And like I said, I've been feeding groups, have been showing up and feeding them bits and pieces of straight up agorist thinking, and they're like, yes, that sounds great, we need to do that. So I think the opportunity is tremendous if we just take those steps, and if that makes any kind of sense anyway.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, because especially over the past year or two that Donnie and I have been traveling all across the country, especially in the South. I mean, most of the people that we run into are MAGA people, or at the very least, they're conservatives, but they're not Republicans. I'm talking about actual conservatives, the
Yes,
people who I
right,
addressed my appeal to when I did that video on the article.
right,
I'm talking about people who actually want government agencies to go away. They want it shrunk down. They may
yes,
not want as little government as you and I want, but they want a
right,
lot less than what we have now. And what you're talking about here, Mike, is building coalitions on areas of commonality. And he
yes,
kind of explained a little
yep,
bit how you're doing that. But how would you suggest? What do you think are some of the best ways to bridge the gaps between liberty-minded people like ourselves, but also actual conservatives who want less government, independence as well? You mentioned RFK. I don't really,
yeah,
I have a problem with RFK, but I don't necessarily have a problem with
yeah,
uh, uh, all of his supporters, except for on social media. I hate those guys. Not really,
right.
but yeah, some of them bug. Some of them,
Some
not
are
all.
bugging, yeah,
But
yeah,
excuse me. But you're right. These people who are on the ground, they're not supporting RFK because they think, oh yeah, I want somebody else to rule over me. They don't think of it that way. They're thinking, man,
No, they don't.
I'm tired of this system. I'm tired of this
Right.
two-party, whatever's going on. Nothing ever changes. I want something different, so I'm supporting RFK Jr. I understand that because I
Right.
understand why people support Trump or Harris because they think that change is going to come. Again, it goes back to that conditioning we were talking about. But how do you
Yes.
bridge the gap between folks like us and maybe conservatives who vote Republican and still lose because they are losing, even if their guy wins, unless they're at like a moderate Republican, then you're winning. But
Yeah. Right.
yeah, what are some ways we can bridge those gaps? I mean, do we focus on maybe just one or two issues that we have in common, or do you go more with trying to bring them around to our way of thinking, or a little bit of all of that, or maybe some other stuff that I haven't brought up? Or what do you think?
I think getting involved in what they're doing that coincides with a positive liberty outcome, right? So yeah, so you're right. The commonality issues, like I would focus on this back in the 90s. I think the formula still works today. I'd focus on issues where we have common ground. I mentioned back in the 90s, it was among the political right, it was taxes and guns, and among the political left, it was anti-war and anti-surveillance state question authority types, right? And the right was nowhere near that back in those days, right? There was nothing. I mean, this is the height of the Bush McCain era, in its infancy of the GOP. So it's very much the opposite of that in the 90s. So it's easy to line up with the Democrats during those days. I think those commonality issues are issue based stuff is worthwhile. I know that just again as an example, I'm kind of working with the election integrity movement here locally in Orange County. And this is obviously almost entirely driven by MAGA people. And now there's probably some Kennedy types who are pushing for election integrity. And of course, to me, and this is a stretch for me because as an agorist, the words election and integrity don't even go together. Those are oxymoronic, right?
Yeah.
But right, it's like so. But I'm learning patience in I thank God I didn't turn into this kind of liberty curmudgeon where I just don't want to deal with anybody,
Ah,
whatever. I'm like, okay, no, I'm engaging with people, and I'm getting about, because you want election integrity, great. I'm not even that concerned about it, but I think about the issue because I don't put my faith in elections to begin with. But
mhm,
what I am doing is I'm taking that issue and I am using it to illustrate the point that we brought up since at the beginning of this latest discussion of ours, which is national level is impossible. You're basically trying to put out a forest fire with a pail of water with this election integrity thing, right? It's not going. It's a valiant effort. It's well-meaning, and that's what I'm capturing. I'm capturing the well-meaning people
mhm.
who want to believe that their efforts are going to make a difference, when I know in a sense they're not going to make that much of a difference, but it will be a slowly digested what do the kids say these days, black pill, I guess, where okay, I'm not really making this, didn't really make the difference that I wanted it to make, but I sure made a lot of good friends along the way who brought a lot of insight. And as they're fighting for election integrity, I'm telling them, okay, so where elections really can make a difference is in your local races. We need to start shifting our attention to that's great. We're going to all band together to try to get some more and squeeze what little integrity we can get out of the 2024 election
Yeah,
on Guy Fawkes Day, of course. I love that, by the way.
yeah.
Right? Yeah. Okay. Just without getting too deep into it, but isn't it wild how I don't think it's by accident that I'm really drawn to the UK right now, because their national election was on U.S. Independence Day. Our election is on Guy Fawkes Day, the
Right.
5th of November, right?
That's true.
This year in
I never thought
2024.
about that.
That's never happened before, right? Right. So think about that. We set off fireworks on their election day. They're setting off fireworks on our
Mm,
election day. Think about that for a minute. Fireworks and what they meant to represent, and what they particularly represent on November 5th in the UK.
mm.
Just a thought. But anyway, these guys have, again, good intentions, but I'm steering them towards the next step while knowing that much of the effort that they're putting in to demanding election is like fighting forest fire, or demanding election integrity is like fighting a forest fire with a pail of water. It may be, and let's put it this way: if they are successful in achieving some degree of integrity here locally, then that only further underscores my point that local is where you can make a difference. So
Right.
I'm kind of going
Yeah.
along for their ride, right? I'm kind of going along with for their ride, and I'm educating them along the way about where the attention needs to be shifting in the very near future, ideally like immediately after November 5th. So the other part of this is folks have a they have in many ways forgotten that they really do have power and influence where they are locally. So I am opening them up to that reality, knowing that people like you and I have a much broader vision of what liberty looks like and is supposed to be than most people will, that we're going to interact with. So I don't mind being the extreme side of that spectrum. Because we're the ones that pull them along. I look at us as people who can pull the center further out of the dystopia, right?
Move
Like
that
we're
Overton
basically
window.
giving to, yeah, yeah, exactly. We're shifting the overseeing window of what society is supposed to be and what liberty really means and is supposed to look like and what the implications are for where we live in our immediate townships. We're the ones that we are going to be the ones that kind of, it takes sort of extreme views to pull the center. The center doesn't move under its own inertia, right? It doesn't have any inertia. That's why it's the center. But my gosh, with kindness, persuasiveness, and kind of commitment, and patience, we can move them. We can move the center along. And I'll tell you what, yeah, sure, I would love an agorist society, but I'll settle for a constitutional monarchy. Why not? I mean, if that's what we get out of this on local levels across the country, a network of constitutional monarchies in micro form and township level form, I'm okay with that, because at least I can address like the people that are, the government in my township. I can at least knock on, the council chamber doors and like say we need to deal with something, or I don't like the way this is being handled. At least I have some semblance of control over that,
Wow.
and I think that's the mentality that we need to embrace. Is liberty is a spectrum, and it takes the people on the extreme side of the liberty spectrum to pull, those that maybe just have a rudimentary understanding, or have a much less comfort concerning ideas like anarchism and agorism and things of that nature. We can still pull them closer to that, and we need to, because otherwise they're being, I tell you, this, they're definitely being pulled the other direction, right? They're being pulled towards, you must obey the centralized power, or either the centralized power can either damn you or save you, but you must believe in the centralized power, and you must feed the centralized power. And that's where we really have our work cut out for us. That to me is detoxing, deprogramming, whatever you want to call it. That's where our efforts are going to, on an individual level, are going to make the most impact, is curing people of that notion that they must have and rely on a centralized power, when in fact the opposite is true. We will succeed far more by decentralizing power and focusing our energy and attention locally.
Yeah, and what I like about what you're saying, Mike, especially when we're talking about coalition building and making these ties, is you're right. We're not going to get anywhere by being that curmudgeon you were talking about and saying, "Well, I'm only going to deal with liberty people. I'm only going to try to
Yeah,
convert people to libertarianism."
we
And
hate each other anyway. I mean, it's right. I
exactly,
mean, we
we
do.
can't stand each
I
other.
mean, we're not good examples of how to get along, right, at all,
Exactly. Yeah,
right?
we are
We're
not great
there.
examples of that.
We are, and that's the other thing too. Is like I'm trying to be better about that. Like I have some pretty strong opinions, but I'm realizing, hey, I'm not going to pick on people who have varying views about the Libertarian Party and whatnot. I
Yeah.
mean, again, I'm a fan of Samuel Conkin, but I also got the privilege in the '90s of working here locally with David Nolan, the founder of the Libertarian Party, and the two of them were not good with each other. They right that. Actually, well, they were cordial, but they had to. I mean, Samuel Conkin was very skeptical, not of David Nolan, but of the apparatus of the Libertarian Party, as people
Mhm.
well know, right? And I shared that skepticism, but I still worked with David Nolan because that's where the people were. That's where the activism
Yeah.
was. That's how you could get stuff done. And because by the time I was around, and active in the 90s, in my 20s, Konkin had already kind of tried and unfortunately failed, in the 70s and 80s to create agorist societies also here in Southern California, Long Beach specifically, right? And it's like, okay, I like what he's saying. I think he's essentially correct,
Mhm.
but like it or not, no one formed a mechanism that did what no one said, which is become an instrument for social change. So
Yeah.
it's weird to me, how we can't at least agree on that as libertarians. So, but here we are, and so we're not the best example of how to get along. We're essentially, it's almost like,
At
well,
least not
don't do what
publicly.
we've been
Yeah,
doing
at least not publicly and
publicly,
socially
right?
wise. I will
Right.
say that, like in a lot of the state parties, local parties, I'm seeing people work together. They're still sniping, they're still backbiting.
Yeah.
That's in every group. But I mean, overall, I hear what you're saying. And the thing is, like, I'll tell you a quick story. Last year, Donnie and I were invited to the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. And this museum is
Yeah.
dedicated to documenting or teaching people about the history of slavery all the way on up to mass
Right.
incarceration. Very deep experience. I would recommend that everybody
Yeah.
goes there.
Right.
But we were invited by a friend of mine, who is the executive director of Conservative Concerned About the Death Penalty. So it was focused very much on the
Okay.
death penalty. Now, I'm not politically a
Right.
conservative. I have personal conservative values, but I'm not politically a conservative. Not
Sure.
voting Republican, but he
Same.
invited us along. And
Yeah.
we were part of this delegation, and it was conservatives concerned about the death penalty. It was also some church groups, Christian conservatives, and there were some people who were on the left there as well. And we went through the tour and all that, and we had a lot of conversations. Donnie and I were the libertarians in the room, the only ones. That was an opportunity for us to come
Right.
together with people who are against the death penalty and to discuss that and how we can fight
Right.
against it. But it was also an opportunity to talk about libertarian values that a lot of these people had never even heard of. Like, like we were being asked
That's right.
questions about like gun laws. Like, we don't believe in gun laws. And some people's jaws
Yeah.
dropped to the floor, like, you don't believe in any
Yeah.
gun laws? And we had a
You
conversation.
know.
Driver's license and same thing. We had they had never heard people
Yep.
articulate these ideas and actually defend them and explain why our current system sucks. You could see the
Yep.
gears turning. I'm not going to say they converted to our way of thinking,
Yes.
but the gears were turning. So while we were discussing how to fight against the death penalty, we were also exposing people to libertarian ideas, which is exactly why we should be reaching out to MAGA people, RFK people,
Yes.
and other people who may not have heard these ideas. Because one, we can get something done that's good, and we
Yes.
can also discuss how to get people's mindsets changed to go further in that direction, shifting that Overton window, like you were talking about.
It's
That's why
huge.
we need to be building
Yes.
coalitions on the local level and even state level too, because death penalty is state level and federal, but
Yes.
on other
Yeah.
issues, even if it's
Defend the guard is huge too, right?
exactly, or even like criminal justice reform. If we get involved with
Yes.
that, chances are we will be working more with people on the left because they tend to care about that
Yes.
more. And
That's right. That's
that's
right.
what we have to start doing these things, not by sacrificing our values. I'm never going to vote for their candidates, but I can work with them
Right.
on these issues that we all agree on.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. That's a fantastic issue, because really, a fully functioning Second Amendment, it's really all the death penalty you need, really, if you think about it, like in a free society, right? That's all the death penalty you need. It's like if you come at me, I may kill you. If you try to hurt me, or people, if you initiate force, I may, respond with lethal force. There's your death penalty, right? That's all you really need, right? And I don't trust the state to do that. I trust individuals to do that. And therein lies a really powerful argument against the death penalty. But having that dialogue with people, right? Getting to dispel the myths and the fears about what libertarians are, what libertarians believe, what liberty-minded people want, is huge. Just being there as the only libertarians in the room, as you described, and I've done that too. I'm the only libertarian in the room, it's okay. It actually helps to get them to put you in they'll let you sit at the table with them, so to speak. They'll realize, okay, well, yeah, these guys are a little more extreme than me, but you know what? They're sensible. Like, I can understand their point. And what's more is, they're on the ground in the trenches fighting with me towards a common goal. That adds the credibility that you need, that you're not only more sensible than anybody might otherwise say. You kind of dispel a certain amount of negative preconceived notions about liberty-minded people, but you're also proving that you're active and you're doing, and you're not just about talking. You're like, I'm a notorious keyboard warrior, have been for a long time. I've only just recently had the opportunity to kind of get back into the activism that I was involved with 20 years ago or more, and that's huge though, because if you're a doer and you're not just a hearer or a talker, you're a doer. That also has incredible credibility. That will lend credibility to your perspective, and the fact that those people who maybe think we're too extreme will at least let us participate and consider us more seriously than maybe they did before. And bottom line, they're not afraid of people like us anymore, right? And so we can, whether they realize or not, guide and shape their movement a little further along the liberty spectrum, and more importantly, out of the dystopian complacency that they're otherwise going to be drugged into, being as they represent essentially a form of center that doesn't move on its own. So that's huge, and it takes people skills that another thing libertarians are necessarily known for, but but we need to cultivate those skills. They're important, and that's going to be an increasing part of what I introduce probably through the Township Liberation X site is communication and people skills, and just practical human skills that, like it or not, I think libertarians are lacking. Now, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I was talking about how libertarians don't get along. We hate each other. So I was mostly joking, but there's some truth to that. But as you pointed out, the political establishment parties are worse, right? I mean, people talk about, all this shady stuff happened at the Libertarian Party convention, which there was, but I'm like, how much shady stuff happens at a DNC convention? How much shady stuff happens at the Republican convention?
Why
Right?
is Kamala Harris their nominee right now?
Right? Like, how did this happen? Right? Again, it's because I may as well just throw this out there, and because I've said this with MAGA people, and they're like, okay, I can actually believe this. I think the intelligence community pretty much took over the executive branch after November 22nd, 1963. I'm just going to throw that out there, because I think the intelligence community has exerted that much power over at least that branch of government for about that long, if not longer. And I can say kind of radical conspiratorial things like that, and people go, what? After the last couple of years, particularly like this administration that we're currently living under, I kind of see that somebody else is running the show.
Yep.
And so people can complain to me about, we're libertarians are bad at this, we're bad at that. I'm like, yeah, but so are the Republicans and the Democrats, and the major parties are just as bad, if not worse, but they get away with it. Why? Because they're the major parties.
Right.
They're the mutual controlled opposition parties that we're accustomed to. So when they do it, it's somehow excusable. But when we do it, when we have our dysfunctions and our clandestine behind the scenes nonsense, it's the end of the world. We should be better than that. Well, why? It's still a political organization, and political organizations are going to act like that.
And libertarians
And that's
still
what
human.
I've sort of. Exactly, we're just as flawed as anybody on the right or the left, and all the egos that go into being big fishes in a big pond, or in our case as libertarians, big fishes in a little pond. It plays into all that. So I think that the lesson though would be the more patience we can show with non-libertarians that we may encounter on this journey that we're describing, the more humility. And that's the thing. I think we have to kind of just humbly accept, our flaws, and just be real with the people we encounter. And I think that'll go also a very long way to giving credibility to our ideals, alongside the fact that we're taking action that is at least meaningful to those people that we encounter, as it is to ourselves.
So in that vein, this actually leads to my next question. I want the benefit of your experience here. What are some of the most common challenges that you yourself have faced when it comes to building coalitions and, reaching out to other ideological groups without losing
Right.
focus on your core concept of liberty? What are some of the biggest challenges that you have faced in this endeavor?
Well, I mentioned it early on. I mean, occasionally people will show up that just they want to cause problems. Like one thing I did a lot of work with decriminalization of cannabis. I worked very actively on Prop 215 in California, which was a medical use, groundbreaking. Like no state had ever done that. I mean, this is the mid '90s, and I worked a lot with the Green Party And I got to say, why I'm so forgiving of Libertarian Party to this day is because I've encountered people from the Green Party who are way wackier than the wackiest
Really?
Libertarian I've ever
I guess
met.
it makes
And,
sense.
and oh yeah, uh, just I mean, just crazy. And actually, I liked that. It's like I was like, you know what? It made me feel better about the Libertarian Party for one, and it also I realized that there are people that are really, really out there on the fringe that can still show up with a sign and do some work in spite of the fact that they're crazy, right? They're complete like social misfits, beyond anything I've even seen. I've seen plenty of social misfitism
Mhm.
in the Libertarian Party, but I mean, the Greens had us beat, right? And I think that's the thing that we have to. It takes a lot of, lack of a better word or term, spiritual discernment to
Mhm.
be able to, okay, how do I uh, incorporate this wacky individual? At what point do they become a detriment versus a help? And that I think is one of the
Mhm.
biggest challenges that I saw in the 90s. And I was reminded again, as I alluded to earlier, I was reminded of that being the case just as much in the UK as it is here. Fringe wackos showing up. Like, at what point, do you just decide this is actually a detriment, whether it's somebody who is just a certifiable goofball, or
Or a
somebody that's
plant.
maybe a legitimately bad a plant or a bad actor, right? And I didn't rule that out either back in the 90s. I mean, I was in my 20s, but I was still paranoid. Thank God. I probably had reason to be.
Oh yeah.
But the thing is, yeah, because and that's going to take a level of spiritual discernment that I can only attribute to faith. Honestly, I really I literally pray, like, okay, who I mean, this is my prayer, God. I'm not trying to preach, but my prayer is, Lord, establish relationships that are of your choosing, deter all relationships
Mm.
that are not of your choosing, and grant me the discernment to know, almost like the AA thing. Give me the discernment to know the
Right.
difference, and to take the actions that you would have me take to address that. And I'm not trying to whip out my concealed carry, questionable California restricted, firearm to deal with it with some wacko. It's like what actions should I take if I'm discerning that this is somebody who shouldn't be here, somebody who's not being, not only not contributing, who's going to be a detriment, and who knows, maybe a plant of some kind. So that's really where, for better or worse, faith plays into it. And it sounds, maybe for people that know my background, it's weird for me to talk like that, because I was raised by objectivists. Ayn Rand would not approve of, of what I just said,
Yeah.
but but hey, that's where I've come to a practical application for our purposes, because we're engaging with people we don't know, so we need some kind of discernment. Now, whether you apply a supernatural component like I do, at
Mhm.
least for those that are skeptics, like Thomas Paine was, like William Lloyd Garrison was, as I mentioned in the book, some of my favorite skeptics, right? They still, I'm sure, had some methodology, and I think the people who are not don't share my faith, who are listening to this, would probably need to employ some kind of similar wisdom methodology to discern those types of situations and those types of individuals that you might encounter, because that will be a thing. That is the danger of organizing locally, and trying to build those coalitions, is those outliers of questionable intent. Let's say certainly
Mm.
questionable actions, and knowing what to do about it in those situations. Yeah, there's no hard or fast rule, I think, but you do have to be prepared for that.
Gotcha. Okay. A last question, because I want to make sure that we're keeping this bite size, or at least as bite size as I can do. But it's interesting because I already know what I want to talk about with you next time. But I want to ask about the future. Where do you see the township liberation movement heading in, say, let's say the next 5 to 10 years? And maybe what are some of the challenges that you see coming up as this starts to grow more?
Well, I think the biggest thing that needs to be accomplished on top of just building these coalitions is legitimately freeing up townships economically.
Mm.
All right. I think the real significant implication that I'm learning from what's happening in the battle between the city attorney of Huntington Beach versus the state attorney of California, who's just I don't want to get into it. I don't want to say it, but just let's just say dystopian doesn't even begin to cover it.
Mm.
But the fact that there's an interdependence on so-called public benefits, right? There's a this is something that really needs to be addressed. Is a city the size of Huntington Beach, sizable town, right? It's a town, sure, but it's a big one. Has uh, you know, a huge amount of people paying taxes to the state government in Sacramento, and in turn, Huntington Beach, is expected to receive some of the benefits of its taxpayer base that paid into Sacramento's programs that fund certain things of which Huntington Beach is a beneficiary. So it's that whole like muddied water thing, right? The sooner we can get our townships to be as independent as possible financially, economically from the state provided benefits, right? The state redistributed wealth.
Right.
Then that's huge. And the way I'm looking at this is almost concurrent. It's certainly of relatively equal importance to just forming coalitions and using local governments to nullify larger governing bodies. Is the idea that we need to create a economically rich, and this is very Samuel Conkin. We need to create economically rich alternatives as decentralized as possible and in our
Mm.
townships as possible. And I don't see with the way technology has exploded, I don't really see why there has to be such a concentration of technologically based wealth in say Silicon Valley in California. Like, why does it have to? Why can't there be a micro Silicon Valley in every township? If you're following, like, why can't there be innovation and entrepreneurship on that on a micro scale in your township wherever it happens to be?
Yeah.
That to me is just, and that's just one example. We've also, I think, talked offline, or maybe it was Donnie, but either way, the idea also that agriculture is so poorly, like our whole food distribution, right? Food growing and distribution system is so overly centralized. That needs to become radically decentralized. I see an opportunity, since we're talking about the future. There's a commercial real estate bubble. That's kind of was my professional background. I have mortgage and real estate, but I see a commercial real estate bubble that is going to just absolutely burst. I don't see that there's any other way than a massive explosion in at least the commercial real estate space. To me, that provides I mean, sure, the government's going to try to bail it out, and we're going to pay the expense if we're not careful. But I see it as an opportunity to repurpose commercial properties for indoor farming, indoor agriculture, like cross-use agricultural use of some kind. That would ideally help to decentralize agriculture, food growth, and production. And that also is really huge in an era where I'm sorry, again, not to wax dystopian, but I mean, famine is one of the four horsemen for a reason. I think four horsemen of the apocalypse. I think it's because there is a legitimate plan to starve the population. I think that's something that we're talking about a real orchestrated threat. That's a real thing. I think that's on somebody's agenda somewhere, and I think that it's again, it's an international thing. I think that it's not by accident like that farmers have been targeted, and not just in the Netherlands and places like that, but right here at home. I think that's something that we need to be prepared for as well. If I was to pick, in fact, I still think if I was to pick the next threat, if we can keep out of a nuclear war,
Yeah.
the next legitimately orchestrated, like real enemy, real threat will be an effort to create a food crisis, which they may blame on global warming, which they may blame on other different things. But
Or
I
bird
think there's a
flu.
concerted dystopian effort. Yeah, a bird flu, or yeah, exactly, or any number of different excuses to harm the food supply in the name of some greater good. I think that's very much a card that we're going to be dealt. And so the sooner we can prepare for that, I think the better. And again, better to do it in a decentralized fashion, to have your township feed its sort of be able to be life sustaining on its own, to feed its own population and so forth. That's another huge component of a truly liberated township, right? Because it's going to take that ability to be self-sustaining economically, and very practically in terms of food production and distribution. That's also going to be a huge thing in the very near future, best as I can tell. It's also very much a part of like my hope for township liberation.
Yeah, so you've given me two additional topics. So I have three so far that we're going to have to talk about in subsequent episodes. I mean, because
No
I think
worries, man.
and Donnie and I have actually talked about this quite a bit, especially with the food stuff. And I don't want to get too much into that now because that's one of
Yeah,
the topics.
a
But
whole other topic.
there's a reason why in many parts of this country they limit how many chickens you can have, how much kind of livestock you can have. There's a reason why they're doing that, guys. It's not just because the roosters are too loud. There's a reason why. And it has everything to do with what Mike just laid out right here. There's your little preview, your little sneak peek. But
Oh, yeah.
yeah, but I do before we sign off though, I want you to just go ahead and plug your pluggables. Tell us about a little bit about your book.
Yeah, real quick, I want to say to that end I don't know if you know this. Another reason why I'm going to go ahead and plug my buddy Stephen McNamara in Scotland. In Scotland, you're required now, as of by law, you're required to register your roosters. You're required to register your chickens in Scotland. So tell me, this is why again there's an alignment here between the U.S. and the U.K. Like I've un and particularly, you got to love the Scottish because they're fighters anyway. They'll pick a fight anyway. Can you imagine a libertarian Scotsman? Like you got to get Stephen on. I mean, he's like, it's like the guy just picks fights instinctively just by being Scottish. But then add the fact that he's a libertarian. Oh my God. But that's what they're dealing with. I mean, this is a attack on being life sustaining, being self sustaining, right?
Yes.
And it's not just the United States. It wasn't even just like the Netherlands and the other countries that were really deliberately attacking farmers. Kind of backfired in the Netherlands. God bless them. But yeah, this in Scotland you're required to register your birds. Kid you not. That's a law that was just passed a couple
That
weeks ago.
just passed. Okay.
So the just passed, right? And so there the main thing that I've noticed is when I co-wrote, and I'm a silent co-author under the pseudonym Thomas Decentralize, Revival of Common Sense, The Case for Township Liberation. You can pick it up on Amazon. I even have like if you hit me up in the DMs, whatever, find me Mike Decentralize. If you're really strapped, I can send you a hard copy. I have a stash of them here. But the beauty of it is, these are taking off not just in the U.S. but people are reading them and distributing them throughout the UK. I have a good friend of mine, David Hockley, who's in London, which is talk about a dystopia. They're the concepts are applicable everywhere. So that's why I encourage you. It's 76 pages on purpose. I released it on July 4th, which was again Election Day in the UK and Independence Day in the US. And for those that don't know, I mean, Thomas Paine was an Englishman, right? So people don't know that. It's like he came to, at the behest of Benjamin Franklin, he came over in his 30s to the colonies and basically helped create a rebellion against his king, right? I mean, it's a heck of a story, this guy. It was really, I mean, he really kind of set the whole thing in motion, even more than Jefferson. Yeah, sure, we needed the Declaration of Independence to make it official, but common sense was groundbreaking. And I'm just trying to, again, revive that spirit. So Revival of Common Sense, you can find it on Amazon. You can go to Mike Decentralize on X. It's at Two Free Mike on X, or at Town Liberation for the organization of Town Liberation. I created an X page specifically for Township Liberation, and yeah, get involved. I'm going to start doing X Spaces workshops for Township Liberation, not just on Tuesdays at noon Pacific time, which is 8 p.m. UK time. I started that specifically for my friends in the UK because it's their evening on Tuesday. But I'm going to do the same kind of thing for us North Americans. I'm going to start doing workshops through Township Liberation. Say, I'm thinking Thursday, 5 Pacific, which is 6, 7, and 8, depending on what time
Yeah.
zone you're in North America. And I think that's going to be an important part of how we get more of this type of activism to come to fruition. I just want, again, I want to inspire people to take the local action we've been describing so far in this discussion.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks for coming on, and you're going to be back soon because we've got a lot to talk about.
I love that you're very much like you get it, and I want to help. If anything, I want to help everybody everywhere. If these podcasts can help people get started doing something like this, I mean, the more the merrier. I envision maybe a network of liberated townships across the world, all innovating and creating and helping each other out, and almost creating another nation in a way, Lord willing. But anyway, yes, I'm looking forward to the next one.
I love it. I love it. Well, thanks everybody for joining me on A Fresh Perspective. Thank you to my guest, Mike Decentralize. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, stay free, stay principled, and most importantly, stay ungovernable.